G'day guys, welcome to this episode, the very, very first episode of Today I Learned, or TIL. It's going to be abbreviated to TIL on the podcast to obviously save space, and because you'll often see this on the internet. Especially on pages like Reddit, you might see people share this on Facebook and they'll just write TIL and it just means today I learned, and then it'll often be followed by obviously a fact, the thing that they learnt today. So I want to start a series like this where anytime I find out a really interesting kind of fact that I'd love to share with you guys in a short episode, I'll just write up a quick dot point script about interesting points about whatever it is that I want to do the episode on, and then I'll record it as quickly as possible and get it up on the podcast. I might not write transcripts for these episodes because they're going to be so short. They should be the kinds of episodes where you can practice not reading beforehand and listen on repeat. So if they're under 5 minutes, you can listen quite a few times and then really absorb a lot of the language without sort of cheating yourself by reading. And if I also get to do these without having to write the transcripts, it saves me a lot of time so I can do more for you guys. All right. So today's episode is going to be humans boxing kangaroos, and I found this out when I was researching the last episode of Ask Pete Anything, that Australia and other places in the world have had a history of fighting kangaroos, and it was kind of weird. I know we have the mascot of a kangaroo with boxing gloves, and it's sort of a cliche in Australia that you have the boxing kangaroo, because when kangaroos fight, they lean back on their tails, they push themselves up with their legs, and then they can often grab onto one another and kick with their legs in order to sort of fight one another and establish dominance. And so we have that whole cliche of kangaroos being fighters. But I didn't know that humans were actually fighting these things as entertainment in our history in Australia. So a well-known Australian mascot is obviously the kangaroo wearing boxing gloves, or the boxing kangaroo. And the idea of the boxing kangaroo has a long history. It originates from 1891, so over 120 years ago, and it seems to have simultaneously begun in Australia, that March, the March of 1891, as well as in the US, in the United States of America, a month later in April. So this is really weird. It kind of came about, it happened at the same time without any communication, just by chance. So the earliest show that was put on between a kangaroo fighting a man was between a kangaroo called Jack and a man named Professor Lindemann, though I don't know if that was just his stage name or he was actually a professor. But it was held on a daily basis at the Melbourne Waxworks. So this actually happened in my hometown. And so a month later, in April of 1891 in the US, a kangaroo at the Philadelphia Zoo called John L. And John L. Sullivan was the name of a famous boxer in the time, and so they'd named the kangaroo after this boxer. Somehow it started having fights with its trainer, I think the person who took care of it in the zoo, like just as a bit of fun, and it obviously got a bit of attention from the crowds, and so the trainer would often go in there and fight the kangaroo as a bit of a joke for entertainment and to pull people into the zoo to buy tickets. So soon after, you can actually pay to see kangaroos boxing humans, boxing men, at carnivals and exhibitions, at theatres and circuses all across Australia. And this soon was exported as well to the US, obviously, and to England, Germany and France. So it was in the US, it was in Australia, and it was in Europe, going around where they had people fighting kangaroos as a way of making money from entertainment. And a group of boxing kangaroos, so kangaroos that had actually been trained to box, were shipped to Chicago in 1893 for the World Fair. So they actually put this on as a show in Chicago in 1893 for the World Fair. So it's just so funny because it's the kind of thing that you would find very hard to believe would happen today. It's just given all of the animal ethics and other considerations that would definitely be a big part of stopping something like this happening. So the sport grew, It grew pretty quickly, and soon there were films made about boxing kangaroos, including the German silent film, and I probably can't do the accent here very well, but it's Das Boxende Kangaroo, which means the boxing kangaroo, I believe. And this movie debuted in 1895, so only 4 years after the first sort of entertainment had started in the US and in Australia. And toward the end of the 1890s and the 1900s, the early 1900s, I want to say, so 10 to 20 years after this had sort of started, the public actually got pretty bored with it and lost interest in the spectacle. And so it wasn't so much because it was a cruel thing. People back then didn't really think, I think, that much about animal cruelty like we do today. It was more that it had become commonplace, so it had become the kind of thing that happens all the time, and it was getting a bit boring. So market saturation, I think they call that these days, when you see that thing everywhere and you're no longer entertained by it. So despite this, the theme of the boxing kangaroo never disappeared, as I know now, because I see it all over the place. And numerous animated films and feature films were actually made about boxing kangaroos, and I think one such film is called Matilda, which was made in 1978, and this was about a kangaroo that is brought to the US and trained to fight a man, except in this film it's a man in a kangaroo costume. But it's kind of funny because I saw some other videos, and if you YouTube fighting kangaroo boxing kangaroos, if you YouTube search something like that, you'll see all of these little clips of men fighting kangaroos, and you'll see them from the 1800s, the 1890s, all the way to more recently, including in films where it's obviously been done more humanely, where they're not actually fighting, but then you'll also see television shows that have real people fighting real kangaroos. And one of these, which I found really astonishing, I searched fighting kangaroos, boxing kangaroos on YouTube, and people like Woody Allen, the famous actor Woody Allen from the US, was actually on a show in 1966 in which he fought a kangaroo live on TV. And the show is called The Hippodrome Show. Apparently it didn't do very well, but you can see the whole fight on YouTube. It's kind of bizarre to think that even in the 1960s this was still seen as okay. So some more facts. Boxing kangaroos were actually painted on the sides of Australian aircraft and ships in World War II. And the Australian Olympics team actually has a boxing kangaroo as one of their mascots. And this is why if you come to Australia, if you visit Australia, and even if you see these kinds of shows or whatever on TV where there are athletes, a lot of the time they're holding a stuffed toy with boxing gloves. So a stuffed toy, a stuffed kangaroo with boxing gloves, and you'll see them here in souvenir shops all over the place. So yeah, it was pretty bizarre, although I think I read that it was outlawed in Australia in the late 1970s. You'll also see a quick Google search gets you a lot of results of recent videos with this so-called sport where someone is fighting a kangaroo, whether it's on a Japanese TV show or whether it's someone in Australia in their backyard with a pet kangaroo joking around. So it is kind of funny. Anyway, that's where that whole cliche of the boxing kangaroo comes from. I hope you like this episode of Today I Learned, because prior to making that episode on the red kangaroo and why it's so buff, why the kangaroo was so ripped, I had absolutely no idea that this was actually something you could pay to see, a man fighting a kangaroo back in the late 1800s and the early 1900s in Australia and also around the world. So that's probably enough for this episode, guys. I hope I can bring a lot more Today I Learned episodes to you in the future. I hope you like them. Let me know what you think on Facebook or via email on the website, and I'll chat to you soon. All the best, guys.